On my 68th birthday, my daughter stood in the hallway of my condo and told me, kindly, that I probably wouldn't remember things correctly in court. Her voice had that polished patience people use with children or pets. Behind her, my son-in-law was boxing up my files, neatly labeled binders that I had kept for years, medical records, bank statements, the deed to my house. I asked him to stop. He smiled, but didn't. That was the moment I knew they didn't think of me as a person anymore. They saw me as a problem to manage. And they had already decided what to do with me. I'm Ellen Moore, I'm 68, and that was the moment. I knew I had to start recording everything. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. My daughter, Anna, is 42, my only child, and for most of her life, I would have stood in front of a train for her. I did the small things that go unseen, packed her lunches in brown paper bags with handwritten notes until she hit middle school and told me that wasn't cool anymore. I paid for braces, orchestra trips, college books. I kept scrapbooks of every certificate she earned, even the ones she forgot she ever got. When she had a miscarriage at 30, I slept on her couch for 3 nights straight, just to make sure she wasn't alone. Her husband, Greg, is an accountant with a clipped voice and tidy shoes. He never really looked at me when I spoke, even when they moved in temporarily after their house flooded in 2019, a 4-month stay that I paid for by postponing a knee replacement. He mostly addressed me in bullet points. Still, I made room. I made it easy. I always made it easy for them to stay close. But things started shifting when I began forgetting names for things, not people, just words. I'd say that thing instead of remote, or I'd call the microwave the oven by accident. My doctor said it was mild cognitive aging, normal, but once I admitted it out loud, it was like they hung the word dementia around my neck and started pulling away. The moment they said it, they stopped asking for my opinion. Anna would loop me in on emails about family events but wouldn't actually ask if I wanted to come. My grandson turned 10 and I wasn't invited to his birthday. They said it was just a kid's thing, but I saw the photos. Her friends were there, her in-laws were there. Then one day, Greg came to my place with 2 envelopes. One was a printout of a revocable trust they wanted me to sign. The other was a packet labeled guardianship options. He said it was just for when the time came. I asked if they thought I was already there. Anna looked at me with that same gentle, horrifying smile she wore on my birthday and said, "You've always told me to plan ahead." That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the street lights came on. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there and started reading. Over the next few days, I moved quietly. I bought a small voice recorder on Amazon, then another, then a third. I slipped one in the linen closet, one in the kitchen drawer, one in my purse. I didn't do this because I wanted to catch them in something evil. I did it because I knew no one would believe me without proof. I began to document every phone call, every visit, every envelope they brought. I began to scan every paper, back up every file. They said I was forgetful. I decided to be unforgettable. I still made tea for Anna when she came over, still asked about work, still hugged her goodbye at the door. But each time I did, I felt that hollow crack forming a little wider between us, a space where trust used to live. A few months later, I got a call from my bank. A withdrawal had been made, $22,000 from my retirement fund. It had my signature, they said, except I hadn't made it. When I asked Anna, her voice shifted slightly. She said, "It was to help with the remodel. You said it was fine." I hadn't. That was the final breach, not just the money, not even the lie. It was that they assumed I wouldn't fight, that I couldn't, that I'd just sit in a recliner with a blanket over my knees and nod like I'd asked for all of it. So I called an attorney, a quiet one, a good one. I told him everything. Then I handed over the recordings. They thought I was too old to be believed, too soft, too slow, but I had everything. Every whisper, every instruction, every slip. The case never made headlines. It didn't need to. In court, they tried to. Say I was confused that I misremembered, but the judge listened to their own voices played back in a steady stream. Calm, uncoached. When the ruling came down, I wasn't triumphant, I was tired. They lost access to my accounts, lost the home. Office they'd been using in my name. I didn't even ask for damages. I just wanted to be left alone. That was a year ago. Now, my phone rarely rings. The house is quiet. I grocery shop on Wednesdays, early, when the store is mostly empty. I talk to Linda next door when she walks her dog. Sometimes we sit on the porch and say nothing at all. There's no part of me that wants them to suffer, but there is a part of me that needed them to see what they tried to erase. I'm still here, still clear. And every morning, when I make my tea, I take a deep breath and remind myself, it's not vengeance to protect your name, it's memory, and I kept mine. It's strange. The things you remember when you start trying not to forget. I found myself lately standing in the hallway for no reason, holding a towel or a coffee cup, just remembering, not because I'm losing anything, but because I know now how easily the past gets rewritten when other people hold the pen. There's a photo I keep tucked inside the drawer of my nightstand. It's creased at the corners and faded now. The kind of fading that looks like fog creeping over the edges. It's me. Barefoot in the backyard, holding Anna in one arm and a garden hose in the other. She was maybe 3, maybe 4. Her hair was wet from running through the sprinkler. She had those chubby cheeks that kids grow out of, but I can still see them sometimes, even now, in the shape of her face when she's not wearing makeup. That was 1984. I was 27. Still figuring out how to be both mother and father after Mark left. He said it wasn't anyone's fault, that he just didn't feel anchored. He packed his suitcases and a carton of books and moved into a studio on the west side. I didn't hear from him again until 1996, when he sent Anna a wedding invitation for his second marriage. So it was me. It was always me. I took on every job I could to make ends meet. I cleaned houses in the morning, worked front desk at a dental clinic in the afternoons, and walked dogs in the evenings when I had the strength. I remember boiling pasta and adding canned tomatoes with garlic powder and calling it dinner. Not because I didn't want more, but because that was what I could give. I kept things going. I kept things clean. I kept the lights on, the lunches packed, the hair combed, the school form signed, the costume stitched for every Halloween, even the years when we couldn't afford store-bought ones. I still remember making a ladybug costume out of a black sweatshirt and red felt circles. Anna won a ribbon at school for that. She carried it around for weeks like it was gold. She never really knew the corners I cut to give her those things. How I sold the wedding china my mother left me so she could go to summer music camp. How I worked through 2 bouts of bronchitis without telling a soul, just so I wouldn't lose the dental job that gave her decent insurance. There was a time I pawned my engagement ring not because I needed the money that badly, but because I couldn't bear to see it in the drawer anymore. That was when she was 13 and needed braces. I didn't keep score. That's not what mothers do. But I remember sitting on the cold metal benches at every orchestra concert, clapping until my hands stung, even when they played out of tune. I remember chaperoning dances and field trips and learning the names of all her friends, just so I could ask about them later. I remember the way she used to lean against me when she was tired. Her whole body slack with trust, like I was the safest place she knew. I don't know when I stopped being that place. After college, she stayed local, got her job at the firm, met Greg. He was polite at first, distant, but polite. I hosted their engagement party in my backyard the same. One from the photo, though by then the lawn was patchier, and the paint on the fence had started to peel. I strung lights across the trees and made chicken salad sandwiches and deviled eggs, just like her grandmother used to make. They brought wine from a vineyard I'd never heard of. I drank lemonade and watched them smile into cameras. When they married in 2011, I paid for her dress. She never asked. I just knew what it cost to feel like you belonged in a room. That day, she looked beautiful. Like light had been sewn into the seams of her gown. She thanked me once, quickly, then moved on to the photographer. After the wedding, I saw them less. They said it was work, or travel, or just being busy, life. I didn't question it. I still sent care packages. I'd bake banana bread, wrap it in foil, and write a note on a yellow post-it, something silly like "don't forget to eat." I don't think she ever read them, or if she did, she didn't keep them. Then came the flood 2019. Their house filled up to the floorboards in one night. Anna called me at 2:17 a.m. I answered on the first ring. They stayed in my condo for almost 4 months. I gave them the master bedroom. I moved into the guest room, cooked every night, washed towels, stocked snacks for my grandson, let them use my car when Greg's engine gave out. I said yes to everything. When they moved out, Anna left a bottle of wine and a card on the kitchen table. She wrote, "Thank you for everything, couldn't have done it without you." I still have the card. The wine went unopened. Then COVID came. I was alone for months. They said it was safer that way. I understood. I did. But holidays came and went. Easter, my birthday, Thanksgiving. A single Zoom call with blurry faces and my name misspelled on the screen. I kept giving. Quietly, I didn't complain. I never once asked why they stopped inviting me to things. I just sent gifts in the mail, an Amazon book I thought she'd like. A set of watercolor pencils for my grandson, even though I wasn't sure if he still drew. I bought a new couch because they'd worn out the old one during the flood stay. No one ever commented. Still, I remembered. So when they told me I was too forgetful to be trusted, that my words might not hold weight in court, I felt something collapse inside me. Not my memory, my faith that all I had done, all I had held together, all the years of steady, unspectacular love, might have meant nothing to them at all. I think there's a kind of cruelty in how families forget the hands that held them up, and a deeper cruelty in pretending they don't. But I wasn't bitter then, not yet. I was just tired, like a book that had been read too many times and left face down on the nightstand. So I started writing things down. At first, it was just lists, groceries, appointments, passwords. Then it became moments, who came by, what they said, how long they stayed, not out of paranoia, out of necessity. I wanted to have something that proved I had been there, that I was lucid, that I mattered. They had spent so long building the story that I was fading, that I was no longer sharp, no longer strong. But I knew the truth. I knew what I had done. For them, I was the scaffolding. They just didn't want to see the structure anymore, and that, I think, is the beginning of all betrayals, not hatred, not malice. Just the quiet decision to stop seeing someone as real. It didn't happen all at once. The undoing of closeness, the little cracks in the walls of family, those were slow, like a roof drip that doesn't seem like much until the ceiling caves in. It started with silences, not angry ones. Not dramatic slamming of door silence, just pauses that stretched too long, replies that came too late, or sometimes didn't come at all. I would send a text, "Hope you're having a good week," and get no answer. Then, days later, Anna might respond with a thumbs up emoji or a one-word reply, "busy." I used to ask questions, tried to keep the thread going. But eventually, I stopped. You can't hold a conversation by yourself. I used to call every Sunday, a habit from when she was in college. Just to check in, ask about work, the kids, her. Garden, she'd answer distractedly, always multitasking. Sometimes I'd hear water running in the background, or her typing. Once she actually said, "Can you mail this instead? I'm just so swamped." After that, I didn't call as much, and when I did, I waited until the phone rang into voicemail. Easier to leave a message than feel like an intrusion. When my friend Marlene passed last year, I sent Anna a text about it. They'd met before. Marlene used to come to Christmas brunch back when I still hosted. Anna wrote back, "Oh no, that's sad." With a crying face emoji, that was it, no call. No check-in, just a cartoon tear. I remember staring at that message for a long time, not because I expected more. I guess I just needed to see it clearly, in digital ink. How far we drifted. There was always a reason, of course. There always is. Work is intense, right? Now, the kids have sports every weekend. Greg's parents are coming to town. It's amazing how full a life can be when it's not yours. Still, I kept trying. I crocheted a sweater for her youngest, but she never sent a photo of him wearing it. I mailed out birthday cards 2 weeks early, just to be sure they arrived on time. Sometimes I got a thank you text, sometimes not. But it wasn't just what they didn't do, it was the way they started speaking to me, like I was made of glass, or worse, like I was a little dim. If I asked a question about something financial or legal, Anna would tilt her head slightly and say things like, "Mom, don't worry about that," or "We've got it handled." And then she'd move on, just like that, like I wasn't part of the picture. There were moments that stung more than others. One time I brought up a memory. Our trip to Santa Cruz in '92. The one where Anna got sunburned so badly I spent half the night soaking her in oatmeal baths. She looked at me and said, "I don't really remember that. Are you sure that was me?" It was, of course. I could still smell the aloe on my fingers. It wasn't just forgetting. It was being erased. And it crept into every corner. At the doctor's office, Anna started insisting she come along. At first, I was grateful. I thought it was care. But then I noticed she would answer questions for me, interrupt, say things like, "She's a little forgetful lately," with a half smile that made the nurse chuckle politely. I would sit there, in the thin cotton gown, feeling my own presence shrink by the second. Then came the day she changed my pharmacy without asking. I showed up to pick up my blood pressure pills, and the tech told me my prescriptions had been transferred to a different location. "Your daughter called it in," she said. "She said it's closer to her house." But not mine. Mine was walking distance. The new one was 20 minutes away. It was small, a little thing. But it made me feel so, moved, not in the sweet way, not in the helping way, in the rearranged way. Like a lamp someone decides looks better in another room, even if it's been sitting quietly in one spot for years. These were the 100 quiet hurts, the small, soft dismissals, the meetings I wasn't told about, the Christmas morning I was invited over after the gifts were already unwrapped. The family photo framed on their hallway wall, one they'd taken last fall with matching sweaters, smiles wide, but I hadn't even known the session happened. The worst, maybe, was when I found out from a neighbor that Anna had hosted a neighborhood brunch. Dozens of people, tables on the lawn. Greg's parents were there, even her college roommate flew in. I saw the pictures later on Facebook. I wasn't tagged, of course. I wasn't there. I didn't ask. I didn't bring it up. I just sat with the knowledge that they hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen not to include me. And that's a different kind of grief, one that doesn't come with a funeral. I started going for walks just to keep my feet moving. It helped with the loneliness. Gave me something to count steps instead of wounds. Sometimes I'd take the long way around the block just to avoid passing their street. I didn't want to see their cars in the driveway. Didn't want to know they were home and not calling. It got harder when my hip started acting up again. I thought about asking Anna to take me to the orthopedist, but the voice in my head said no. It wasn't pride, it was self-preservation. I didn't want to sit in another waiting room with her scrolling through her phone, looking everywhere but at me, one morning. I opened the cabinet under the sink and saw a can of furniture polish I'd used since Anna was little. Lemon-scented, still half full. I remembered using it on the old wood table she used to do homework on. That table's gone now, sold in a garage sale she organized without asking. I had come outside to find strangers walking away with pieces of my past, holding them like they meant nothing. I asked where the table went. She said it was just taking up space. I looked down at my hands that day. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to make sure they were still there, that I was still here, because when someone you love treats your life like clutter, you start to question your own outline. The worst part was I kept hoping. Even through all of it, I thought maybe, one day, Anna would see it, see me, realize that what she was doing wasn't protective, it was erasure. That she'd traded relationship for responsibility, and in the process, I'd stopped being her mother and started being her obligation. But that day never came. Instead, came the day Greg used the word capacity while talking about my will, and the look on Anna's face measured, distant, made something inside me go cold, so I smiled. I nodded. I said I understood, but something in me changed that day. I stopped waiting to be remembered. You can love someone so much that you ignore the sound of doors closing behind you, one by one, quietly, without slams or farewells. You tell yourself it's just a draft, that they'll come back, that this is just a hard season. But one day, you look around and realize you're standing in a house with no exits left. That's what it felt like. After Greg used the word capacity in passing, I started hearing it everywhere on the edge of conversations, slipped into forms, whispered in doctors' offices like a preemptive obituary. I'd gone from being seen as a person with preferences to a person with conditions. The word didn't scare me. What scared me was how easily it gave them permission. It started with paperwork. One afternoon in late March, I received a packet in the mail, no return address. I opened it at the kitchen table as sunlight broke across the tile. Inside were documents I hadn't asked for, a power of attorney form, an updated trust agreement, and a typed letter from a law office I'd never contacted. The letter said I had elected to allow my daughter and son-in-law to manage my estate for my protection. It included language about property, financial control, and medical consent. It was all cleanly written, polished with the kind of legal softness that feels like insulation, warm at first, then suffocating. I read it twice before setting it down. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I just sat very still, the way you do when a storm passes close, but not overhead, listening to the silence afterward. I didn't sign. I called the number on the letter. The receptionist told me Anna Moore and Gregory Collins had already been in for 2 meetings, that I'd been represented in absentia based on previous verbal consent. I asked her to repeat it. She did. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was afraid, because I couldn't understand how they'd gotten there, how they'd stood in rooms and used my name like a tool, how my voice had been pulled from my throat without me noticing. I waited until morning. Then I called my old attorney, Mr. Levin. He retired years ago, but still answered his own phone. He remembered me, said he'd meet me at his home office. I brought everything in a canvas bag: the letter, the documents, copies of the will he'd helped me draft years earlier. He looked through them, eyes narrowing as he read. This wasn't authorized. He said softly, "This is positioning." I asked him what they were trying to do. He said, "They want the house, now." Let me tell you about the house. It's not a mansion. It's not even large. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen with linoleum floors, and a porch that creaks when you walk across it. But it's mine. Bought it in 1993. saved for years after Mark left, used the settlement from my mother's estate as a down payment, paid off the mortgage in 2011. Every corner has my fingerprints painted walls. Patched windows, garden beds lined with stones my grandson collected when he was little. I didn't need to leave it to anyone, but I'd always assumed Anna would have it one day, as a gesture, a memory, not as a prize to be seized while I was still living in it. Mr. Levin helped me draft a letter, official language, legal notice of revocation. We filed it with the county and mailed copies to the firm Anna had visited. It was quiet, procedural, no confrontation. But it lit a fire. 2 days later, Anna showed up at my door. She knocked lightly, the way people do when they already think they're right. She had that same look she wore when she was 8 and caught breaking something but still wanted to explain it. Only now, the stakes were different. I thought you trusted us, she said. We were just trying to make things easier. That word again, easier, as if I'd asked them to lift a burden I hadn't even acknowledged. As if simplifying me was an act of love. I told her I hadn't asked for that if they were concerned. They should have come to me, sat with me, spoken plainly. She said, we didn't want to upset you, as though this was the better version, as though violating my autonomy was the gentler route. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse, I just stood there, arms crossed over the cardigan I'd had for 15 years, and felt the cold air between us settle like a final draft. She left after 10 minutes, no hugs, no promises. I didn't hear from her for 3 weeks, and then the final blow came. It was my next bank statement. I opened it expecting the usual pension deposits, utility payments, but I saw something else, a withdrawal, not huge, just enough, $3,200, labeled house maintenance. I hadn't authorized it. I called the bank. They said the transaction had been approved online from a device linked to my account, one that had been added last month. I checked the IP address. It matched Greg's office computer. They had accessed my account, removed money without permission. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, strategic. They didn't think I would notice, and if I did, they didn't think I could prove it. That's when I opened the drawer where I kept the voice recorder, the one I'd started using months ago. I plugged it into my laptop, scrolled through the dates. I found the conversation from the morning after they first mentioned capacity. Greg had said, "We'll move forward whether she signs or not, just document that she's been informed." It was there, clear, calm, recorded. That was the line. The moment I stopped wondering whether it was just care gone wrong, whether they were simply overwhelmed. No, this was calculation. This was quiet theft wrapped in good intentions. That night, I sat on the porch, listened to the wind in the trees. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just detached, not from the pain, from the people who caused it. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to fight them, not with words, not with pleas, with silence and evidence. Because if they thought I was too forgetful to testify, then they'd never expect I'd recorded everything. There's a kind of power in stillness that no one recognizes until it's too late. After that last withdrawal, the one Greg made without a word, I didn't confront them. I didn't write a long letter. I didn't call and ask for an explanation. I simply stopped. I stopped speaking. Stopped explaining. Stopped making myself available for misunderstanding. I went quiet, and in that quiet I began to make space for truth. They always expected emotion from me. That's the trick of how these things work. People like Anna and Greg, they prepare for a fight. They script out their defense, but they don't prepare for silence. They don't know what to do with it, and silence, when used with intention, is not absence, it's preservation. I started small. I cancelled the automatic guest permissions on my online banking, removed the shared devices from my accounts. I updated passwords, made them long and strange nonsense phrases that only made sense to me. I froze my credit, pulled hard copies of every document I had, called the utilities and changed the contact preferences to require voice confirmation, mine only. Then I bought a second recorder. A better one, sleek and quiet, it slid easily into my purse, and I carried it like a talisman. I began saving, not just recordings, but copies of every transaction they touched. I combed through old statements, highlighted patterns, cross-referenced phone records with the mails. I printed things out of the library to towns over, in case they were watching my printer history. Paranoia, maybe, but even paranoia has a place. When you've been dismissed as unreliable, I booked a meeting with Mr. Levin again. We sat at his old wooden desk. The room smelled like pipe tobacco and dust. I handed him a binder. One-eyed made myself, tabbed and color-coded. He flipped through it slowly, nodding. "You did all this yourself?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He looked at me, really looked. "You're not losing anything, Ellen. You're sharper than half the clients I see." I didn't need the compliment, but I tucked it away like a folded note. Proof that I hadn't imagined myself back into usefulness. We started drafting documents, a formal cease and desist, a petition to review the unauthorized power of attorney claims, an affidavit of cognitive clarity, simple, methodical tools. The kinds of things people forget can be wielded quietly. At home, I made a list of the people I could trust. It was a short list. Marlene was gone. Sandra, my neighbor, was kind but always too busy. The postman, maybe. He at least smiled with his eyes. I didn't need an army. I just needed time, and silence gave me that. I stopped replying to Anna's texts. They were sporadic now anyway. The occasional check-in, never asking how I was. Just confirming details. What time was your next appointment? Or did the lawn guy show up? Things she could document. Nothing that reached me. When she did call, I let it ring out. She left voicemails that always began with "Hey, just checking in, hope everything's okay." That tone of forced cheer that smells like distance. Once, she even said, "I hope you're not upset." As if that was the worst case scenario. Not violated, not betrayed, just upset, emotional, difficult. I archived the messages, filed them, didn't respond. 3 weeks into my silence, she showed up, no warning. Just knocked on my door on a Thursday morning while I was trimming dead leaves from my peace lily. I didn't open the door, just looked at her through the peephole. Her face was tight, rehearsed. She knocked again, then texted, "I'm outside. Can we talk?" I didn't answer, not to punish, to protect, because by then I understood what was happening. She and Greg weren't trying to help. They weren't trying to safeguard my future. They were repositioning me. Turning me from a mother into a liability, a figurehead, a stepping stone toward a life they wanted without the burden of tending to mine. So I watered my plant, turned on the radio. Let her stand there with her unspoken words and her waiting. After that day, things sped up. A new attorney one I hadn't hired sent a letter to my door. This one was more forceful, more formal. In light of recent behaviors, it began, and then concerns regarding mental fitness. They were laying the groundwork, trying to build a case where I didn't even recognize myself, but they didn't know about the audio files. The date-stamped emails, the surveillance of my own life I had quietly built. I met with a specialist, a neurologist, took every test she offered: cognitive recall, language, attention, orientation. She told me afterward, smiling, that I scored within the range of a healthy adult. I asked for a printed report. She gave it to me. I filed it. Then I contacted a new lawyer, younger, sharper, a woman this time. I told her everything. Gave her the binder, the voice recordings, the bank statements. She took it seriously. No raised eyebrows, no condescension, just questions, the right ones. I felt seen. My silence wasn't about absence, it was about strategy. For the first time in a long time, I was acting, not reacting. Every quiet choice was a step out of the trap they were trying to build around me. I even cleared out the guest bedroom, packed up the extra linens, put a lock on the closet where I kept important files, stopped answering the landline, installed a camera by the front door. None of this was loud, none of it was angry, it was simply a reclaiming. Because somewhere along the way, I had been made to believe that my worth was measured by how much I handed over, my time, my money, my decisions. My body in waiting rooms and my voice in legal forms, but I had learned something else in that. Silence, you do not have to perform your competency for people who benefit from your erasure. You do not have to justify your existence to those who already decided you're inconvenient. You do not have to explain why you want to keep what you built with your own hands. The silence became a boundary, and the boundary became a shelter, and inside that shelter, I was building something solid, something they could not take, not because I was hiding, but because I was remembering, and this time I would not forget. When you stop explaining yourself to people who've already stopped listening, something inside you begins to shift, not suddenly, not with some cinematic rush of empowerment. It's slower than that. Quieter, like your spine straightening after years of leaning towards someone who never turned their face to you. That's how it started for me. The silence I had built became not just a shield but a place to grow again. I began waking earlier. No alarm. Just the soft arrival of morning light pressing against the edges of the window. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notebook, not to plan anything, just to take note, the date, the weather, a thought that crossed my mind. What I remembered, what I still held. There was a gentleness to it, a return. I didn't call Anna. I didn't tell her about the paperwork being prepared, or the fact that her petition for guardianship had quietly stalled. My new lawyer had filed motions behind the scenes, orderly, precise. The house had been placed into a protective trust with me as sole trustee. My accounts were no longer accessible to anyone but me. Even my healthcare directive had been updated to assign power of decision, not to family, but to a neutral third-party advocate recommended by my neurologist. Every move was a stitch in the fabric of my autonomy. I'd been reduced in their minds to someone soft, someone vague, someone they could place on a shelf and speak around. But I was none of those things. I had simply been quiet, and my quiet had been mistaken for weakness. That misunderstanding worked in my favor. They didn't know that I had started journaling again. I used to keep a diary when Anna was small. A soft blue notebook with little painted forget-me-nots on the cover. I found it in a box in the attic when I went searching for an old receipt. It was strange reading my own voice from 30 years ago, tired but tender, worried but proud. I used to write down things Anna said, things like, "I want to be a tree when I grow up," and "Mama, your hugs feel like blankets." I held that notebook in my lap for a long time. That was the last time she truly saw me as whole. Before convenience and control replaced affection, before the distance, I bought a new notebook, leather-bound, heavier, not for nostalgia, for evidence, for reflection, for the kind of clarity that builds when no one is around to interrupt, and I began writing every day. Meanwhile, I started walking a different route through town, not the one that passed her neighborhood. I didn't want glimpses anymore. I didn't need to measure her lawn's greenness or guess whether her porch light was on. I walked the east path instead. Down past the old train station, through the woods that wrapped behind the library. I saw birds I hadn't seen in years. I started bringing peanuts in my pocket for the squirrels. It was something. It was enough. And then something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. Handwritten, from Anna. She said she didn't understand why I'd been distant, that she was worried about me, that Greg had only ever wanted to help, that I was being influenced by someone, my attorney, maybe. And that it wasn't like me to be so secretive. It was a soft push dressed in kindness, a manipulative kindness. I knew it well. She still didn't see me. She didn't mention the money, the house. The papers I never signed, she didn't acknowledge any of it, only how my silence had made her feel, not what caused it, not what it meant. I didn't write back, because some things don't deserve a reply. I moved differently after that in more ways than one. I began volunteering 2 days a week at the food bank downtown, signed up without telling anyone. I help unload boxes, shelve canned goods, smile at people whose faces remind me of all the versions of myself I used to carry: tired mother, frugal shopper, woman holding too much and not being offered a hand. There's a young woman there, Dina. She's in her 30s, lives with her sister, just got out of a rough marriage. She asked me one day how I stayed calm. I told her the truth. I started listening to my own voice again. I also took up bird watching. Bought a little pair of binoculars at a second-hand shop. They're scratched and stubborn to focus, but they work just fine. I keep a list of sightings: cardinals, jays, one fox sparrow with an orange beak I saw near the creek. It sounds small, doesn't it? But small things are what rebuild a soul. I cleaned out the guest room completely, donated the bed frame, turned it into a kind of reading space. No one comes to stay anymore. No one asks. But the room still holds warmth. My plants live there now: geraniums. A stubborn orchid that finally bloomed after 4 years of nothing. I sit in that room most evenings, with the window cracked, letting in the late light. It's quiet, but not lonely. I still keep the recorder close, not because I expect another betrayal, but because it reminds me of what I endured, what I caught, what I proved. I renamed the file folder on my laptop from evidence to clarity. It felt more true. Once a week, my attorney calls just to check in. We're waiting on a formal review of the forged transaction. She says it may take time. I tell her I have it, because I do, and because I know now that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's simply about reclaiming the narrative, saying, this is what happened, this is how I survived it, and this is who I am now, without apology. It's funny what happens when you stop asking to be heard. You start hearing yourself. Lately, I've been thinking about travel. Just a short trip, maybe a quiet beach town with a boardwalk and a place that still sells postcards. I haven't been on a plane since 2014. But the idea of disappearing for a while on my terms feels like a promise. I even bought a suitcase, not a big one, just enough room for what I want to carry. And I think that's what all of this has been about. Not revenge, not anger, not proving anyone wrong. Just figuring out what to carry forward, and what to finally, blessedly, set down. I used to think that absence was a kind of punishment, that when you walk away from people, especially your own blood, they'll notice the gap you leave behind and fill it with regret. But that's not always how it works. Sometimes they fill it with noise, with justifications, with distractions. They write their own version of the story so they don't have to sit with what they've done. But still, there's a reckoning. Always, the silence between me and Anna grew wide enough to feel like geography. Weeks passed without a word, then months. I watched the seasons turn through my kitchen window, leaves dropping, frost gathering, snow coming and going. I used to send her photos of the garden changing, especially in the spring when the crocuses pushed through the soil like tiny messengers. Not anymore. This time, I kept the beauty to myself. And while I didn't speak to her, I heard things. Small things, whispers that trickled in through unexpected places. Sandra, my neighbor, mentioned offhand that she hadn't seen Anna's car at the house lately. Said Greg had been coming around more, picking up mail, pacing the sidewalk, sometimes just sitting in the car with the engine running. She said it like it meant nothing. But I knew the look she was describing, restless, something slipping. Then there was the note from the HOA board, nothing dramatic, just a formal notice that Anna and Greg were late on their quarterly dues, the kind of thing most people would ignore. But I saw the pattern forming, missed steps, late fees, the dominoes. Beginning to lean, Greg had depended on the idea that I would fold, that I would flinch, that I would bend under the pressure of being seen as unwell, but when that narrative unraveled, when my legal protections held, when the recordings surfaced and their intentions lost their polish, he didn't have a backup plan. They thought I'd crumble, that I'd fight and wear myself out, the way people do when they're hurt and desperate to be believed. But I didn't, and in my absence, things started shifting. I heard that Anna's work schedule had changed, that she was moved to a different team, not demoted, exactly, but repositioned away from client-facing roles. She never said it outright. But the timing aligned too closely with when the investigation into the financial guardianship began. And I suppose it's hard to keep your professional image intact when there's a formal petition on record suggesting misconduct with an aging parent's estate. I didn't gloat. That's not my nature. But I did notice, and then came the birthday, mine, my 69th. It passed quietly as I wanted it to. I made a lemon cake from scratch, using a recipe I hadn't touched in years. I ate a slice on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea and the soft sound of robins in the trees. I didn't expect a call. But I checked the phone anyway. There was a text from Anna. It said, "Happy birthday, Mom." That's all. No name, no apology, no warmth, just the hollow echo of a tradition she couldn't quite abandon, but couldn't fully honor either. I didn't respond, not out of bitterness, but because I had nothing left to extend. I had become a ghost in her life, not the haunting kind, but the kind that makes people check shadows twice. The kind that forces people to sit with silence where comfort used to be, and it wasn't just emotional. Without me, the logistics changed. No more financial cover. No more weekend child care favors that I never got back. No home to fall back on when things got tight, the safety net they had used, sometimes without thanks, sometimes without asking, was gone. I used to keep a shelf in the hallway closet, stocked with toys and books for my grandson, little things I picked up at thrift stores, puzzles, a coloring book once signed by the author, after the fallout. I donated them all to the local women's shelter, not to be cruel, but to stop waiting. Because when you stop waiting, you start living. And when you start living again, the people who dismissed you have to reckon with what they lost. I heard, through a friend of a friend, that Greg's parents had asked questions. That a family dinner turned tense when someone brought up the situation with me. I imagine Greg brushing it off, calling it complicated. I imagine Anna sitting there, saying nothing. Because to speak the truth out loud would mean acknowledging her part in it. That's the thing about quiet betrayals. They stay loud in the minds of those who committed them. One morning, I got a call from the principal of the local middle school. She'd heard from a volunteer coordinator about my help at the food bank. Asked if I'd be interested in coming by twice a month to read to students in the resource room. Kids who needed a calm voice, a steady presence. I said yes before I even asked what day. The first time I walked into that classroom, one of the students looked up at me and asked, "Are you someone's grandma?" I smiled. "I used to be," I said. "Now I'm just someone who shows up." And I think that's what they lost. Really, not just a mother, not just a grandmother, but someone who showed up. Every birthday, every report card, every late-night phone call, every flooded basement and dentist appointment and crying jug on the kitchen floor. They lost the kind of person you don't notice until she's gone. They lost continuity. They lost witness. They lost the one who remembered every version of them, their fears, their first steps, their almosts and could-have-beens. And when you lose that, you lose something sacred, not dramatic, Not loud, but essential. I know they feel it, even if they don't say so, especially because they don't say so. Regret wears many faces. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like sudden busyness. Sometimes it looks like vague Facebook posts about family being complicated. But I don't chase their grief. I have my own life now. It's not glittering. It's not grand. But it is real, and it is mine. I didn't write it with any plan in mind. It wasn't meant for the courts, or for my lawyer, or for Anna. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or tidy conclusion. It was just a Tuesday afternoon, the rain hitting the kitchen window with that soft, steady rhythm that makes you feel like you should be doing something gentle with your hands. So I pulled out the notebook I'd been writing in, the one with the brown leather cover and the stitched spine, and I opened to a blank page. I didn't even think before the pen touched paper. My hand just moved, as if something had been waiting inside me to be spoken, not out loud, just to be known. I wrote, "Dear Ellen," and for the first time in a very long time, I wrote to myself, not to defend myself, not to remind myself, but to acknowledge myself. Because through everything, through the cold legal language, through the visits that turned into assessments, through the silence I chose to protect my name, no one had ever turned to me and said, "You were right to feel hurt. You were right to expect more. You are not the problem." So I wrote it. I told myself everything I'd needed to hear. I wrote about the early years, the cheap groceries, the double shifts, the small joys. I reminded myself that I raised a daughter without bitterness, that I showed up for her in all the ways that matter, even when I wasn't shown much in return, that love, real love, is quiet and consistent and sometimes invisible to those who never had to give it. I wrote about the erosion, the slow peeling, away of voice and presence. I admitted what I hadn't said out loud, that I'd let it go on too long. That I'd been complicit in my own erasure because I thought it was kindness to stay silent. I thought silence would be interpreted as grace, but silence, when received by the wrong people, only becomes permission. I told myself that it wasn't my fault, that I wasn't broken or bitter or paranoid, that I didn't imagine what happened, that it happened because I had something they wanted, and they believed I wouldn't fight to keep it. I wrote about the recordings, the papers, the small victories no one else will ever understand, not because they were grand, but because they were mine. And because reclaiming something doesn't have to look like winning. Sometimes it just looks like holding on. And then I wrote about my hands. My hands have aged, the skin thinner now, the veins more visible, but they've held a life. They've stitched hems, gripped steering wheels on icy roads, folded laundry at midnight while a feverish child slept down the hall. They've written checks, planted gardens, wiped tears from eyes that never once thanked them. They've done everything without asking to be praised. I looked at them, resting on the page, and I felt something like mercy. Not for them, for me, and I wrote, "I forgive you for waiting so long to stop explaining." That's when the tears came, not in a flood, but soft and steady. I let them fall onto the paper, let them mark the words. There was something beautiful about that, proof of feeling, proof of self. At the bottom of the page, I signed my name. Not the way I do on checks or legal forms, but the way I did when I was a girl, practicing cursive in the back of a spelling book, loopy and unsure, full of hope. Ellen Moore. It looked like a person. Afterward, I didn't read the letter again. I didn't tuck it into the folder with the legal documents or put it in a fireproof box. I didn't post it or frame it or send it away. I took it out into the backyard barefoot, in my old sweater, the sky still grey and soft from the rain, and I burned it. There's a small patch of dirt where I sometimes light garden clippings or compost safe scraps. I placed the letter there, struck a match, and watched it curl into smoke. It didn't feel like a loss. It felt like release, like the last thread snapping off a weight I didn't realize I'd been dragging, as it turned to ash. I whispered just once, to no one, "Thank you for surviving this." And I meant it, because I had survived, not just what they did, but what it almost did to me, the self-doubt, the ache, the fog of being unseen. I had survived the shrinking of my voice. And I had grown it back, syllable by syllable. Later that evening, I made a pot of soup from scratch, chopped leeks, carrots, thyme, stirred slowly, let it simmer while a record played in the living room. It was an old album I hadn't heard in years. Judy Collins. I think there was a time when that voice filled every Sunday afternoon. I sat down at the table and ate alone, but it didn't feel lonely. There was something whole in the silence now, not the silence of being excluded, the silence of being restored. And that's the difference no one tells you about. There's the silence they put on you when they stop seeing you, and then there's the silence you choose when you finally see yourself. I chose mine. The next morning, I walked to the post office and mailed a small package to Dina, the woman I volunteer with at the food bank. Inside was a scarf I'd wear upon, wrapped around a tiny, folded card that said, "Keep showing up," no signature. Just that, because if I've learned anything, it's this: legacy isn't built in grand gestures, it's built in who you show up for consistently, quietly, without needing applause. Anna never knew that. Greg never understood it, but I do. I don't know if I'll ever hear from them again. If I do, it won't be because they suddenly woke up to what they did. It'll be because something's gone wrong, a need, not a reach, and I will decide, when that day comes, whether to open the door. But for now, the house is mine, the life is mine, and the letter, though it's gone in ash, lives in my bones. Proof that I can write my own ending, and trust that it doesn't have to be sad, just true. There's a rhythm to the days now that feels like a kind of music, soft, slow, without rush or edge. I wake up when the light touches the edge of the curtain, not when a phone call demands my attention or someone else's schedule bends my spine. I stretch in bed, not because it's part of a routine, but because I want to feel my own body move. There's no one watching, no one hurrying me, and that, in its own way, is a kind of wealth. Most mornings I make a single cup of coffee, black, and drink it while standing barefoot by the back window. The garden is quiet then, dew still clings to the tips of the grass. And sometimes I catch the last breath of a fox or a rabbit slipping back into the underbrush. I used to take pictures of these things. Now I just witness them, and I think that's the better way. Somewhere along the way, I stopped needing to prove that I was here. I don't check the mail every day, not because I forget, but because most of what arrives now is noise. Flyers, credit card offers, forms I've already seen. The important things, the real things, don't come through the slot anymore. They happen in the air, in the smell of bread rising in the oven, in the way the wind moves through the pine trees, in the steady beat of my own footsteps on a dirt path. There's still a file cabinet in my room, carefully labelled. Everything's in order: wills, deeds, medical proxies, not because I expect anything anymore, but because it's mine, my story. Written clearly, not hidden, not blurred, not vulnerable to someone else's edits. I've even added a letter, a real one this time, not to be burned, but to be found. It's sealed in an envelope marked only if necessary. Inside, it says very little. Just a few lines, a note to whoever ends up sitting in this chair one day, holding my keys, flipping through drawers. It says, "I was here, I chose peace. Please honor that, that's all. I still go to the food bank twice a week. Dina and I have grown closer, though neither of us pushes for more than what's there. We unpack boxes, share warm coffee from a chipped thermos, talk about small things, weather, soup recipes, her sister's baby. There's comfort in conversations that don't demand performance, just presence. Sometimes we sit in the back for a few minutes after the shelves are stocked. There's a little bench near the alley where you can hear the delivery trucks coming in and the laughter of teenagers from the high school nearby. One afternoon she asked me if I missed my daughter. I told her I miss who she used to be. That was enough. There's a place I like to walk now. It's a nature reserve, 15 minutes from my house. Not many people know about it. There's a path lined with oak and a narrow stream that runs almost silently except in spring, when the rains make it sing a little louder. I bring a sandwich in my bag and sit on the bench beneath the tallest tree. I've started leaving. Sunflower, seeds on the wood railing. The birds know me now, they wait. It's funny, the kinds of relationships that ask for nothing and still give you so much. Sometimes I think about the trial. Not the details, those are all documented, safe in a drawer. But the way I felt sitting there, listening to the recordings, watching their faces when the truth played out, unedited. There was no screaming, no gasps, just the weight of clarity settling over the room. That was the last time I saw them both in person. I think about that sometimes. 2. There's grief. Yes, I'd be lying if I said it vanished like smoke. But it changed shape. It's no longer sharp, no longer urgent. It's become something quieter, a hollow I carry like an old injury, one I don't poke at, one I've made room for. I suppose that's what healing is, really, not fixing. Just making enough room for the pain not to bump into everything. I haven't heard from Anna in over 7 months now. No birthday texts, no cards, no emails pretending we still share a language. I don't check her social media anymore. I don't wonder what they're doing. I don't make excuses for their silences. I've stopped narrating their absence, and in doing so, I've reclaimed my own. There's a journal I keep now, not the leather one. Just a soft cover spiral with pages that bend at the corners. I don't write every day, only when something inside me needs a place to rest. Last week I wrote, today I sat still for almost 2 hours. I think that might be a record. It made me laugh. Sometimes in the evenings, I light a single candle and sit on the back porch. The air is cooler now. The trees are starting to turn again. This will be my 70th autumn. Though I only really started paying attention to them a few years ago, I can't believe how much I missed when I was busy being everything to everyone. Now I am only myself. It is a quiet life. There are no holidays circled on the calendar, no big reunions to plan. No casseroles to bake out of obligation. I still bake, of course, but only when I want to. Only when the house feels like it needs that smell again, warm, spiced, certain. The other night, I dreamed I was at a lake, alone, but not lonely. The water was still, a rowboat floated nearby. Tied loosely to a post, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I wasn't about to leave. I was just sitting there, watching the ripples. The sky was wide and endless, and I remember thinking in the dream, this is what it feels like to be undemanded. I woke up with that word in my chest, undemanded. It's not freedom in the way people usually talk about it, but it's real, and it's mine. I don't know what comes next. Maybe more of the same. Maybe a surprise, maybe one day, a letter, or a knock. But I'm not holding space for it. I've filled that space with other things, books, walks, warm tea, soft light, truth, the kind of truth that doesn't shout, the kind that stands calmly and says, I lived through this, and I kept myself whole, and now I live a quiet life, and that's enough. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful.